Kick our meeting off here today. Great. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Happy December, almost end of the year, getting into the holiday season. Kelly's got the right colors on. Um, all right. We have a 2 hour agenda today, and I can pull that up on the screen, or Liz, maybe you can drop it in the chat as well. Um, and how about let me just share my screen for once. Give me 1 second here. Let me make it a little bigger. Okay, here we go. So in our 2 hours together, first of all, and we don't have this on us, I want to welcome Quincy and have her introduce herself, but just 1 second before we do that. Our usual, we need to do a little housekeeping, approval of the minutes, that kind of thing. Liz has got one comment in, I think, so we're going to go over that just quickly, as we like to do at the beginning of these meetings, if folks have written anything in between our last meeting and now. Then we're going to spend an hour where Secretary Moore is going to walk us through this memo around the reporting program, which, as you all know, is one of the items in your climate action plan. So we'll spend an hour doing that with Secretary Moore. And then before we go to our first public comment, Secretary Moore will also give us an update on what's going on with the clean vehicle regulations. As you know, when things happen in California, things need to happen here too in Vermont. So that'll finish us up around 12:20. We'll do a little public comment there for folks who have comments on that. And then we've got a piece of work to do here around approving the draft annual legislative report. Steering committee looked at this, and Jane will walk us through that. And if we need to make any real-time adjustments that we can agree on, we do it now. If for any reason we can't agree on that, we'll talk about the plan B on getting you all comfortable with that report. The last thing we're going to do is talk about some virtual public meetings that are going to happen in January. And then we're going to talk about your cadence of meetings into 2026. We'll do another round of public comment if there's any last things, and then we'll adjourn by 1. So that's our meeting. Any quick questions on the agenda, or Jane or Liz, something that I might have missed in my quick walkthrough? Okay, great. All right, well, before we do anything else, let's welcome the newest member of the Vermont Climate Council, Quincy. And Quincy, I don't want to mispronounce your last name, so I'm going to let you do that so I don't get it wrong. And if you just want to say hi and say a tiny bit about yourself, yeah, the council would love to get to know you.
Hi everyone, I'm Quincy Savick and I'm from Vergennes, Vermont. I'm a senior at Vergennes Union High School, and I'm a member of the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, and I'm just joining the full board council, so I'm super excited. And yeah, if you guys want to chat about anything, you can give me an email or anything. But yeah, just excited to be here.
Likewise, Quincy. It's very exciting to have you part of this. You know, it's a different phase of the work, having completed the update of the climate action plan in June. So the council sort of entering in a different phase, with a little less intensity. So hopefully it'll be like less demanding of your time. And still it's important for the council. And we'll talk about what the Rhythm 2026 looks like. So glad to have you here. Okay, great. Uh, Minutes are linked in the agenda from our last meeting, which was way back in September, right? Um, and as we usually do, we just give a moment. If anybody needs a moment to remind yourself of those minutes, feel free to click through to them right now. Um, I'll give folks just a second. Any concerns with the minutes? Anything that we didn't get quite right? Okay. Anybody need a little more time with them? Okay. Thanks, everyone. All right. So with no concerns and no request for no time or additional time, excuse me, let's consider those approved. Thanks. Liz Amler, what did we get for written comment that came in?
So we had one comment, and I could share my screen briefly. So this commenter provided information for an upcoming presentation taking place tomorrow evening on Zoom around electricity and affordability. So I'll drop this in the chat after, but you could see more information here if you're interested in attending. And the commenter hoped that the council would attend and wrote that it relates to your work on the council. And that's it.
Super. Okay. Thanks. Great. Thank you very much. All right. Now I'm just scanning my screen to see. Yes, Secretary Moore. There you are. Um, Welcome. And I know you have some slides. And would you like me to put them up, or you want to share your screen in talking
Up.
about this memo? What would work best for you?
I think if you want to put them up, David, that would be great.
Okay, just give me a 1 second and I'll be there. Let me just turn the floor over to you, Julie, and to tee up this while I'm getting my slides up.
Sure. So, as folks may remember, one of the action items in the climate action plan was a request to ANR to look at what it would take to stand up a reporting rule and then report back by December 15th. So, here we are. There is a memo that goes into a little bit more detail and encourage you to read it. But hopefully, this will sort of hit the wave tops. And then, ultimately, I think the council's goal was to see this delivered to the legislature, and probably at the end, assuming folks are comfortable with the substance, we'll need to talk through exactly how the folks would like to see this transmitted. So, if you want to jump to the next slide, or David.
Mhm.
So here's the exact language, and we did look at a couple of different approaches that I will talk you through before making our recommendation here. In addition, we did dig into the resources required and required to do this well. I think that's going to be some really important context for the legislature, that to have a robust reporting program will require additional staff and resources, and know that this is a challenging time for that conversation. So next slide. The two different approaches we looked at, one I would describe as harmonization. So as folks may be aware, the Department of Motor Vehicles and the Tax Department both currently collect some relevant information to a greenhouse gas reporting rule. We did work with Jane and her team worked with the tax department, I think 2 years ago now, to implement changes on one of their key forms where they collect fuel data, which they have implemented, and we've been benefiting from this increased granularity. And we can talk about that, or certainly turn it over to Jane to talk about what they have. We also looked at a standalone reporting rule where covered entities would be reporting directly to the Agency of Natural Resources. And for several reasons, our recommendation is a standalone reporting rule would be most appropriate for Vermont. Next slide. So the reasons for that is a standalone reporting rule would allow us to really define the data that it is that we want, as opposed to sort of working through others to try to obtain the data we want. We would then also have the ability to expand the scope of the reporting program if it was determined that additional sectors are appropriate for future mitigation activities. Right now, if we were to use a harmonization approach, we would be limited to what tax and DMV are already collecting. I think it's also important to acknowledge that this helps fill a little bit of the void that is created as federal data reporting requirements are being rolled back. Our existing approach does rely on several federal data sets, and that reliance seems less advisable in this moment. I think, would flag that we do have general legal authority to require the reporting of greenhouse gases, but we do believe, based on our review of programs in other states, there is incredible value in having the General Assembly specifically authorize us to create a greenhouse gas reporting program, and also the importance of ensuring that this work is adequately resourced because we would not be able to perform it with existing staff. Next slide. So in terms of those resources, we are estimating it would take approximately 2 FTEs worth of capacity to do this work and show sort of the various tasks those folks would be assigned to. We have estimated about $300,000 for platform development, and that is based on some work Jane and her team did, reaching out to other states with greenhouse gas reporting rules, and then acknowledging that there's about $200,000 worth of ongoing annual costs associated with the program, half of which goes into maintaining that platform, and then the other half of which would be used for third-party verification, which really ensures the quality of the data set, which we know is important if this is to serve as the basis for future regulations. Yeah, there we go. And then just talking about sort of what we envision as the program scope. At a minimum, we're saying it should cover transportation in the RCI sector. As you all well know, this is more than 70% of our statewide GHG emissions. So the covered entities in this under this reporting rule would be the suppliers of those fuels. I think there are some open questions about whether to incorporate non-energy processes or voluntary reporting from other sectors. And this conversation about scope, our recommendation is should continue as the legislature considers the opportunity. I think it is important to note that expanding it to include some of these other pieces may also result in additional resource requirements at the agency. I don't know if there's one more slide or not, David. Yeah. Oh, and then this is just there was a lot of work that went into the development of this memo led by Jane and Lauren. While the memo itself is relatively brief, they did provide a bunch of supporting documentation that's included in these 2 appendices to the memo, and encourage you to take a look at that as well. So just my thanks to Jane and Lauren and Rachel Stevens from our legal services program who really dug into this work and I think have put together a thoughtful, thorough memo that helps lay out what possible next steps there are should the state choose to pursue a reporting program.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Secretary Moore. So I guess the request here, Julie, is the request that we want to have a discussion about this, and you're looking for approval to forward this memo to the legislature. Is that what we're doing here?
Yes, essentially. So this is our report back to the Climate Council. So I think to the extent climate counselors have questions about the substance of the memo or the recommendation, now would be a great time to ask those questions. And then afterwards, I do think we need to discuss exactly how this gets transmitted if and how this gets transmitted to the legislature.
Got it. Helpful. All right. So let's do the discussion part now about wrapping our minds around this, questions we have. Jared, go ahead, please.
First, thanks, Secretary Moore, for the good presentation, and Jane and Lauren and Rachel and everyone who was involved in developing this recommendation. Just a couple of questions. One is, and this would just be a friendly suggestion, that I think the memo focuses primarily in the introduction on the relation between a reporting requirement and a potential eventual cap and invest program. But my understanding is that even though that's kind of consistent with and reflecting some of the priority recommendations in the climate action plan, I wonder if making a broader point would be helpful, which would be that for any either sectoral, comprehensive sectoral program, any multi-sectoral program, a reporting requirement would be an initial underlying um, key, uh, key piece. That whatever policy framework by sector or by multiple sectors Vermont would pursue, this would be a necessary precondition to doing that. And I just think that has come up in conversations that we've had as a council, and I understand that this is directly linked to the recommendation around cap and invest. But I think that this is even broader than that, and it would be worth saying that in the memo if that's a friendly suggestion. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is just a question, which is, I think, Secretary Moore, if you can go back, I think it was your fifth slide.
Oh, that's me. Hang on.
Oh, sorry, David.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Give me one sec. I may have even just closed it off, so just give me one second. I'll open it back up. Keep going.
I understand the um, where the slide says that the legislature is has a crucial role in terms of identifying and appropriating resources for the staff that would be necessary. I think it's for one further back on slide 4.
To say that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, and so the part that's bolded at the bottom there, ensure adequate resourcing, makes perfect sense to me. What I'm less clear on is, given ANR's existing authority to require reporting of greenhouse gases, why the kind of conclusion was arrived at that it would be helpful for the General Assembly to specifically authorize ANR to create a comprehensive reporting program. My understanding is that that authority already exists and doesn't need legislative authorization. Can you speak more to that?
Sure. I don't know if Rachel Stevens is on the line, but in part, this is, I think, a reflection of some legal challenges that have occurred in other states where there wasn't an explicit authorization. I see Rachel has her hand up, so that's great. And trying to make sure that we are benefiting from or avoiding maybe pitfalls that have been identified by others. And happy to turn it over to Rachel to put more detail there.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Just for the record, I'm Rachel Stevens. I'm an attorney that works at Agency of Natural Resources. So I did an in-depth review of all the states that have greenhouse gas reporting programs and the basis for their statutory authority. All the states that have reporting programs have specific authority for a greenhouse gas reporting rule in their statutes, whether it's their climate statute. And in the only example of a state that operated under its existing air authority, which was Washington State, there was a legal challenge against Washington State, specifically related to the issue of fuel dealers claiming that they're an indirect source of emissions, not a direct source of emissions. And so there was some drawn out cases related to that. So one of the specific recommendations was to get explicit authority, even if we were to agree that we have this general authority to cover both direct and indirect sources of emissions, just to be really clear. And that case was a 2020 case. And in that case, Washington State had to go back to their legislature and get the authority to kind of move the legal issues. So that's the basis of that recommendation.
Thanks, Rachel.
Given that, Jared, are you feeling satisfied that the comment then makes sense?
Yeah, I just had a question about that. I think that that's
Okay,
good to go.
great.
And in terms of broader language, Jared, I'm happy to work with folks and see if we can broaden it out a little bit. Part of what we endeavored to do in the memo is sort of tie it to some of the other reports. The legislature has commissioned both the cap and invest work done by the treasurer as well as some of the work done by the PUC. And I think maintaining those connections is important, but certainly could also then make sure that it's clear that that data doesn't only inform a potential cap and invest, but has that broader set of application.
Great. Thanks. Joey?
Um, yes, thank you. Well, first, huge thanks to the A&R team, Jane, Lauren, Rachel, everyone who did the good work and put this proposal forward. And I support where you're leaning in terms of, moving not the harmonization route, but establishing our own greenhouse gas emissions reporting mechanisms. And just to build on what the secretary just noted, underscoring the utility of this information for a variety of purposes. I work a lot with communities at the local level. 10 energy committees have been doing energy and climate planning for a long time. And the need for data related to the transportation and thermal sector. We have significant amount of information related to the electric sector, but where 70% of our emissions come from those sectors, and it's really important for planning to support that application as well. So really eager to see this put forward, and hope that we can support the recommendation that ANR has outlined.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Joey. Any other questions or other things in there? Rich, and then I saw Chris, you came off mute. But let me go to Rich first, and then I'll go over to you, Chris, if you're trying to get in.
Yeah, I'll start just by echoing what everybody else said. Thanks to the folks who did the work to put this together. And it does make sense to support a recommendation to the legislature uh, to give explicit authority to create, a GHG registry. The I am I'm not quite sure what's going to be the outcome of this conversation today, because we haven't, as a council, had the opportunity to examine the details in the recommendation about the, the dollar cost and the FTEs associated with doing a registry. And I would be reluctant for the council to somehow, without having gone through that process, to be seen to ratify those numbers. Um, I think it's fine for us to ratify and to support the idea that a registry is needed and that legislative explicit authorization is desirable. But I am reluctant to say that we know that we need those specific dollar amounts to be appropriated. I think that's something that we should let the legislature decide for itself based on testimony that they will hear.
Okay.
Can
That's a
I
helpful distinction. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I guess I need to push back a little bit on this. I think throughout we have struggled with having the legislature provide what the agency has indicated is adequate or necessary resources for the work. I would submit we have put forward a credible estimate and attempted to detail those costs. And I think, Rich, it is incumbent on the council, if they are supporting this recommendation, to also support the agency's budget request as necessary to support it. The legislature ultimately can make a different decision, but your opportunity here is to ask us questions about how we prepared that estimate. I don't see that I can be comfortable pushing this forward without having resources connected to the substance of what we were being asked to do.
I'm fine to include in whatever this council does a recommendation that the legislature provide appropriate resources to support the work. I just don't know that we have the information in front of us to say what those dollar amounts are and whether it could be done with um, a different number of staff members.
Okay, let's put a pin in that and circle back as we get a little further along and see how we might increase your comfort level or figure out language that feels comfortable for the council and then A&R specifying detail. Chris, did you want to say something before I jump into Matt and David Mears? Were you trying to jump in there?
I was just going to say, if you want a motion, if the secretary and the council wants a motion to endorse the proposal, that I'm happy to make that motion. But I didn't know
Okay.
what action you guys wanted to have. I just figured if we're taking it to the legislature, it might be good to have a vote, but otherwise, just consensus agreement might be fine too. I'll just
Great.
leave it at that.
Thanks, Chris. Let's see how we do, and we may be able to just move it ahead with consensus approval. I think there's a little bit of discussion to be helpful on the front end of this, and then
And
we'll
I'm
see where we
also just
stand.
like I'm sorry, apologies. I'm in my traditional public meeting mode where you have to make a motion
I
in a
know.
second, and then you have discussion on things. So apologies for that. I wasn't
No,
trying
you're
to jump
good.
the gun or stop conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. I always forget to mention to folks that we wrote a book called Breaking Robert's Rules as an organization. And so I think there's a little bit of funny process. Sometimes it gets sideways. Matt and then David.
Yeah, thanks, David. Matt Coda here. I get it. Harmonization is not ideal. And there's a cost associated with the check that the Secretary Moore outlined. Understand that. There's also another cost, and that's on the fuel providers, particularly the small fuel providers that help keep costs low and provide competition to the marketplace, who are very good at counting gallons and waking up in the middle of the night and delivering heating fuel to someone who really needs heat, like last night. But we don't know what this end result will be. And if it is a result where they're having to do calculations, complicated calculations to determine the carbon content of their fuel, as we have seen in other states, um, I would certainly advise anyone to oppose this. If you need a double check on the gallons that we report on the 25th of the month, every month for gasoline, diesel fuel, heating oil, propane, and kerosene, sure. Is there a cost to that? Understood. But having the fuel dealers do the work to count the carbon, I think is prohibitive to the smaller companies in its regulatory capture for the large fossil fuel providers. So on behalf of the small fuel providers, I would say, sure, double count the gallons, but don't make the fuel dealers do the work.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt. Okay. And just Matt, to be super clear, is there anything you've read in this memo that would suggest that? I just want to make sure that you're not reacting like a specific line or something in the memo that is
No,
concerning.
but as someone who's been around a bit, I know why the registry failed for the clean heat standard. And we don't want that to repeat itself. I don't want that to repeat itself, I should say.
Got it. Thanks, Matt. David?
I don't, you said you stuck a pin in the resources question. That's what I raised my hand to speak to.
Let's talk
But
about it.
whatever, if you you want me to share my
Yeah.
thoughts on that right now?
Yeah.
I think on balance, I lean towards, I'm not 100% sure. I'd love to learn a little bit more about what Rich's concern is. But on balance, I feel like supporting a specific request to the legislature is more important than kind of a generic, like give the agency more resources kind of message. And I know enough about the department's budget to be dangerous. I'm 10 years out of date, but I know it's complex. I know it depends heavily on federal money that's been cut. I know the legislature constantly, it under resources the agency and the department. And I know that they can't take on new resources and projects without shifting them from something else. So, particularly this kind of work, which would not be grant funded or supported through a federal program. So I don't have really any question about the need, and I have no reason to question like the scale of funding. If we're going to ramp up and build towards having a cap and invest type program, the agency needs time to build the resources and the staff to do that, and be able to hire whole, FTEs, even if it's part of this specific project, is an investment in the longer term effort. I think the further that we can go and the more aggressive and ambitious we can be as a climate council to press for that, the better. I assume that there may be some risk that, that if the number were perceived to be inflated, on a resource short time frame that the legislature might say no and give up on the whole thing. And there's maybe a fear that it's like a poison pill to have too large a request. But on balance, I lean towards let's support the agency's request and get them as much resources as quickly as possible.
Thanks, David. Rich. Well, you're on mute. Hang on one sec. Wait, you're still. There you are.
There we go. All right. Thanks. So I'm appreciating this conversation. I used to run an agency too, and so I understand what we're talking about here. And to and I'm in support of the comments made by others that we should recommend to the legislature, um, firmly and warmly, making sure that this program is adequately resourced. And I sort of get David's point just made that, um, it's part of a broader, push, and that's a good thing for us to communicate as well. Um, so, um, even though I'm really reluctant to endorse specific numbers because we just haven't heard enough to, satisfy me that I could go to the legislature and say, I definitely know that we need two FTE. I am afraid that asking for that much money will be a poison pill, and we won't get half a program, we'll get nothing. And um, I think we need to be cognizant of that, and that we should say, we support the agency, and we also support um, going forward with reporting, even if we can't do everything um, fully at the get-go.
Hmm. Joey, was your hand about this, or can I jump over to Secretary Moore?
My hand is about this, but
Okay, yeah, jump in then.
I
Yeah.
guess one of my questions is definitely want to make sure this is a priority. I think it's a really important priority. It's recognized as a priority for the Climate Council. It's pivotal to the work and foundational to making good informed decisions moving forward and meeting our targets. I fully support capacitizing A&R for the needs. And I think that these are probably very real numbers. I agree that it's a very challenging fiscal environment. I guess one thing I wonder about, knowing that the Climate Action Office, has done a huge amount of work, like on the Climate Action Plan, is some of that work potentially undertaken by existing capacity, within the team? Is it too new? I'm just curious, or can we nod as a climate council to prioritizing this as something that we hope the Climate Action Office will endeavor to undertake? So looking for ways to harness the time and expertise of existing members of the Climate Action Office, so that our ask is credible and we are giving A&R the capacity that they need. But if we can, ask for a lower amount, because I share Richard's concern about tight economic times.
So I guess I'll drop into the chat the directive. This memo will come from us. I think the Climate Council's question is whether or not to put a cover sheet on it. We have put forward a credible estimate of what it will require to do the work. We have seen countless examples of the legislature underfunding things that they ask us to do, and I'm unwilling to start from that position. If this is the highest priority of the Climate Council, we have provided our good faith estimate of what it will take. There are many other obligations that the Climate Action Office has. We don't have capacity to take on this work with existing staff. And I think this is how this agency finds itself stretched unbelievably thin and unable to sort of meet expectations in terms of timelines in many areas, because we are asked to take on things and not provided sufficient resources. And I am frankly frustrated that the council seems to be suggesting we should cut back on what is a credible estimate of what it will take to implement one of your highest priority recommendations. If you don't think the legislature will fund it, that's a conversation to have with the legislature. I don't think it's appropriate to place pressure on us to reduce our estimate of the level of effort required.
Think from my benefit, it'd be helpful to understand what we're building towards today. Are we looking, you had mentioned, Secretary Moore, that the memo is something that ANR can provide. What are we looking for from the council? Are we looking for a statement of agreement with the memo? What's the goal here in this conversation?
I'm sort of envisioning the council may want to put effectively like a cover memo or a companion memo to go with this. I think from the legislature's perspective, right, they haven't been in session since we adopted the climate plan to the extent, and I think members of particularly the House Energy Committee were paying attention, but for others who received this memo from us, it may feel like it fell out of the sky because it is not in response to a legislative directive. It's in response to a climate council request of the agency. And so that sort of context probably would be helpful to the legislature in understanding where this ranks in terms of the Climate Council's overall priorities.
Great. So we're looking today to agree on sort of a handful of points that would be the council's, cover to your memo, essentially. Okay. David Mears?
Yeah, this goes to a larger point that I was hoping I'd have a chance to make today. So I'm just going to interject it using this excuse. But I do think this is a moment for the Climate Council to be assertive and to actually intentionally do outreach to the legislature. And I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I think we have an obligation to do that. If we stand by our recommendations, then we need to show up at the legislature and say like, here's our priorities, here's the top things, and we need to ask them for resources to do it. There's a lot of comments a lot of the recommendations include the legislature should fund this, that, or the other thing. And we didn't prioritize, well, we did kind of prioritize it, but we need to do a little bit more work, I think, and engage with the legislature to make that point. And, this is a top priority, the Cap and Invest program. And for better, for worse, the nature of our system in the state of Vermont is we rely heavily on the executive branch to let the legislature know when they need resources. And they often don't ask for resources. And then we end up with underfunded programs that are more symbolic than anything. So, I would love to be inside actually, I wouldn't love to be inside the books of ANR. I'm happy for other people to do that. But I trust that the agency's done some careful thinking around this. And I would like to show up aggressively as the council to the extent that do we have the common will to do so and say, this is a priority and we think you should fund this and this and this and even suggest levels. So that's if I were the king of this council, that's what I would be.
Thanks, David. I appreciate that thought. Jared?
Thanks, David. I don't know if this is kind of a second to Chris's motion or a friendly amendment of additional detail, but we're just advancing this conversation, hopefully. Where I'm at is that I would definitely support the addition of a cover letter, cover memo to this report and recommendation from ANR saying at least two key things. There may be others, but two would be that this memo and its associated recommendations are consistent with one of the top priority recommendations from the recently adopted Climate Action Plan, and that the council supports the recommendation put forward because of that consistency. Um, I think that one of the reasons it's valuable to do that is that because of the amount of research that went into this, there is additional detail and information in the memo that's simply not in the cap. And I, for one, would want to be kind of I hope that as a council we can be on the side of, and I as a counselor am on the side of the recommendation specifically around a standalone program for all of the reasons that were laid out in the memo. You know, that's something, for instance, that was not in the cap, but I think it would be good for us to show kind of a unified approach and message around. And even if folks could disagree on specific numbers, I think I think we all know that standing up a comprehensive reporting program will require additional resources. And I don't think we need to be asked to, uh, you know, to me, it's just supporting the agency that will be implementing this, their request for the resources they've identified to do this successfully. So those are and I don't know if that needs to be a specific amount or just say, you know, this is consistent with the cap. We support this recommendation, and ANR has identified the resources that it believes are necessary to do this. Um, I I would be supportive of a cover memo, cover letter from the council, including those points.
Thanks, Jared. And we're getting close to this, like lasering in on what you want to do, and we can test for agreement about that. Um, Secretary Clark.
Yeah, just briefly, and I think a lot of what I was going to say has already been said, but I think consistent in my last year involvement as chair of the Climate Council in various discussions, the importance of resourcing what's included in the climate action plan. And I think this is an example of, ANR putting together their best estimate of what's needed if we moving forward in this manner. And so it's just important that we resource, because having the vision without the resources won't get us where we need to go.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Rich, back to you. And I sort of want to try to land this plane in what specifically the council wants to say today on this.
So just to be clear, I am in agreement with comments made by David Mears and Jared and Secretary Clark just now, and Julie, that we should, support this proposal, and a cover memo has been discussed that points out that this is a high priority and we think it's a foundation stone for future progress is really important, and that it needs to be adequately supported in order to be launched is important. And so I'm fine with that. So I think we actually have consensus. And the only question is how we articulate the whatever we want to say about the amount of resources needed. Jared had a nice formulation for that a minute ago.
Right. And I've been trying to take notes and as we went, and I'll share it back in just a second.
But I'm trying to be really clear here that even though I asked a question about
Yeah.
How we would decide on the numbers, that I think we have complete agreement among us that this is a high priority. We said it's a high priority, and we know it's a foundation stone, and we want to urge the legislature to adequately support it.
Great. Joey, and then I'm going to share something on my screen.
I very much appreciate what you're going to share, David. I'm sure you've summarized it. And I also just want to underscore that I am 100% in agreement that we need to advocate for the capacity for the ANR to do the work that they need to do, which I'm sure is a very well-informed and thoughtful estimate. I was simply asking a question about, existing capacity. And so just trying to recognize the moment, but ultimately happy to go to bat for the funding needed because I 100% believe this is foundational. So, David, I encourage you to lay out your summation because
Let's
I'm sure
try
it
it.
captures it well.
Yeah, and Matt, go right ahead quickly, and then I'll share my screen with something.
Yeah, I just want to be on the record. I totally support Secretary Moore's contention, which they can't be asked to do more without the funding necessary. My issue with this is that I fear what's on the other side, and what the other side is regulatory capture, which puts small family fuel dealers out of business. So I'll be voting against it. I'm not in 100% agreement.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, great. So this is the sort of simple version of this, right? From a council action standpoint, that you would support a cover memo from the council, and it says the following. It says, this memo from ANR is consistent with one of the top priorities of the climate action plan, and we therefore support it. It is a foundation stone for future progress. We also support the request of the agency to have resources to implement this effort. Any quick friendly amendments to that, and then we'll do a quick test. Yeah, Stephanie?
I just I just feel like it needs to be even a little bit stronger. I'm not sure what the words are, but maybe there are a couple of adjectives we strongly
Like
support. I mean, even something
strongly?
as simple as that. I
Yeah.
just feel like it's really important that they have the resources to do this. If we don't have the resources to do it, we can't do any of the things that it's just so that's what I would say.
How's that? I added two stronglys in there. Okay.
Well, they don't
Yeah,
have to both be strongly, but I think that we do need well, what's another one? We can
Yeah.
vary it.
Yeah, yeah. How about this? Okay. Well, we'll get the actual words
Yeah.
right in a sec. Kelly?
I saw Jared threw something in the chat also,
Oh,
modifying resources, so necessary or sufficient or adequate resources, something like that, I think might be the way to modify the second bullet point.
okay. Great. All right. So again, this is tricky, right? Because we meet like once a quarter, so like we need to do this kind of in real time. It's hard for us we can't do this over email for a variety of reasons, right? We need to do this probably now or have call another meeting to do it. But I would like to test, and we already know Matt's going to have difficulty saying yes to that, but I would like to test for folks, and maybe we can just do it in the chat quickly for everybody. If this were the language, would you be okay with this language attached to the ANR memo that's going to go to the legislature? So I've just asked every single climate council members if you just say a yes or a no, or something like what. Thanks. Thanks, everyone. I'm just watching them come in. Folks, we're looking at the chat right now. Great. Okay. All right. And thanks, Matt. We can note that and note your concern in this in the meeting minutes. Okay. Great. So I'm seeing near unanimous, and that's good enough for our decision making here as a council. So thanks everyone who's done that. So let's consider this what'll happen for the next steps. This will be a little cover note that goes on the front. And if there's any sort of detail on this, the steering committee can be activated to make sure it's, landing in exactly the right way. Is that anything else on this? And let me just turn back to Jane as well and others. Anything else that needed to get done on this particular issue? Okay. Chris?
This isn't anything that needs to be done, and I'm asking. I'm not being provocative. I'm just asking out of ignorance. is there any relationship between ultimately whatever reporting we do and then also implementation of the Climate Superfund Act? And again, I don't know if there is, could be, should be, or anything. I just didn't know if there was any relationship there.
So Jane or Julie, do you want to,
I would actually defer to Rachel on this one.
or Rachel, even
I
better.
can, yeah, I can try to take that. There are really specific, there's a really specific list of what is eligible for funding from the Climate Superfund Act. So I can put the citation in the chat, but I would direct if folks are interested in what can and can't be funded from the fund, that's pretty clearly listed in the act itself. So I'll just put the link to that, and there's a list of what can be eligible costs. Did I answer your question? I'm seeing Jane in the chat. Comment.
Yeah, Chris gave a thumbs up on that, so I think you got it, Rachel. Okay. Okay. All right, so the next thing we were gonna do after that, oh, sorry, Jared, yeah?
If you want to move on, David, that's totally fine. I was just going to offer to respond, give my understanding of a response to a question that was in the chat related to this, but happy to hold that.
My instinct is to keep moving forward
It's
here.
fine.
And thanks, everyone. I think this was I appreciate the outcome from this piece on the reporting requirement. The next thing we were going to do is Secretary Moore is going to give us an update. Oh, no, before?
Can I, yeah, just
Yeah.
Jared had made a suggestion about trying to broaden the introduction a little bit. Are folks comfortable just leaving us to do that work, add a sentence or two, as opposed to cycle this back in front of the Climate Council? I think we have agreement on the intent there, which is not to maintain the linkages to the other reports the legislature has already ordered, but then on top of that, make clear that this has this broader potential application.
Okay, great. Just
Okay.
thumbs up from Jared on that. Okay, great. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Sometimes you don't know exactly where we're going to land, and we landed. Secretary Moore, you were going to give folks an update on what's going on with the clean vehicle regulations and what that means for Vermont and what Vermont needs to do.
And I believe we have slides for that
Okay,
too, if
hang on,
somebody
give me a
else can
sec.
help me.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sorry,
I'm not sure we do.
We don't have slides for this because,
okay.
Yeah, but Rachel was here to help support you specifically in the update that we discussed last week.
Perfect. Then I will just jump right in. So there are a bunch of moving pieces, as I assume many are aware, around advanced clean cars and clean trucks. So as folks may recall, last winter, the governor issued an executive order pausing our implementation of advanced clean cars 2 and clean trucks. Specifically in the clean truck space, there were a number of questions raised about the ability to actually fulfill the obligations that were created under advanced clean trucks. These same concerns were expressed to many of the participating states. And in the interim, CARB has gone back, taken into consideration some of the questions and concerns that were raised, and is proposing a set of amendments to the advanced clean trucks legislation. I see these amendments as frankly consistent with the concerns that the governor had heard that caused him to issue the EO. And so I'm recommending we move forward with the amendments to the advanced clean trucks statute. On the advanced clean cars, things are a little bit more complicated, but we'll do my best to explain what it is we're looking at here, and then can also talk about timing and next steps. As I know many are aware, under the Congressional Review Act, Congress has attempted or has endeavored to pause implementation of Advanced Clean Cars 2. That is going through court proceedings as we speak. I think the challenging part is if not Clean Cars 2, then where are we? And this has become an area of some debate, whether we've reverted to Advanced Clean Cars 1 or if we're reverting all the way to the federal CAFE standards. The proposed changes that we are contemplating to the advanced clean cars side of things would make clear that the floor here in Vermont and presumably in most other Section 177 states it is actually advanced clean cars 1. So where we were prior to enacting the Clean Cars 2 legislation. The challenge in this is one of timing. California has indicated this is the way they are going to go, but they haven't done it yet. And obviously, we need to move in lockstep with California. That's our only option. So it's really about when, not if, we move forward with these two sets of rule changes. There's also constraints on our end in that we can't, for example, start with clean trucks and then tack on clean cars once California completes their work because they're all in the same section of our statute and we can only have one open rulemaking process in place at a time. The other piece is we want to make sure we're positioning ourselves to complete this work by the end of the calendar year, which is when the current pause would otherwise expire. So it's a fairly complicated landscape. We are endeavoring to navigate between legal challenges, executive orders, and incomplete actions by the California Air Resources Board at this point. But our proposal is going to be to move forward in rulemaking later this winter. And happy to have Rachel or Jane chime in and either clean up any messes I've made or add additional detail and help respond to questions folks may have.
This is Rachel. That's a great summary, Secretary Moore. And I guess I would direct anyone who has specific questions about what the amendments are. All of this information is on CARB's website. So you can see the rules that are proposed rules that are under consideration.
Yeah, thanks. And my only comment would be just to flag that for newer counselors, there are different requirements associated with these rules because they were recommended in the initial cap as well as this updated climate action plan to follow along with California and update as proposed. And the Global Warming Solutions Act requires a different level of engagement around these rulemakings than regular ANR rules associated with the Administrative Procedures Act. So the Climate Office will be supporting and working closely with the Air Division to put those meetings forward as we work to amend the rules.
Great. Okay, so this is more of an update. There's actually no action that's being asked of you as a council today. However, if there's questions folks have, this is a good time to ask them. Matt?
Hi, thank you for that explanation. Just some more color to that, because I also work for car and truck dealers here in Vermont. And certainly at least one OEM manufacturer is behaving as if that is in fact true, that we have reverted to, despite the confusion. I understand all that, as if we're in advanced clean car 1, in that they have a model, an Escape, and a Corsair, a Lincoln Corsair and a Ford Escape that does not adequately pass the emissions test to be qualified as advanced clean car 1, but does meet CAFE standards, so it could be sold in New Hampshire. But they're not offering that for sale to Ford and Lincoln dealers here in Vermont.
Okay. Helpful information. Questions, comments from counselors about this? Okay, great. Joey?
Well, I mean, I appreciate very much the update and all that ANR and others have been doing. It is obviously very complex, shifting, and challenging landscape. Secretary Moore, totally appreciate that. So appreciate the update and really hoping that Vermont remains as committed to this program as possible, following California's lead as we must. But I guess I just have a little bit of a separate question, and I don't mean it to be tangential, but considering we're talking about rules, I just wanted to raise, I mean, as people may remember, the Advanced Clean Cars package of rulemaking was the most significant pollution reduction measure that we've advanced since the adoption of the initial climate action plan. So I guess I have a broader question, which is related to there's an rulemaking deadline in the Global Warming Solutions Act that by July 1st of 2026, the ANR, secretary has to commence rules to achieve the GHG reduction targets by 2030. So I'm just curious if our primary pollution reduction measure that we've adopted and advanced is getting weaker. I'm just wondering like what, the agency might have plans for to achieve that target, commence rulemaking, et cetera. So it's a broader question and it may not fit here, but I just thinking about that in the context because the clean cars pieces were so critical to achieving our reduction.
Secretary Moore?
I think that is a much broader conversation, and I think you're offering a somewhat different interpretation, Joey, than we would have of the direction provided in statute. Going to suggest we not try to take that up right now, but happy to have that conversation at a subsequent Climate Council meeting.
Okay. I know it's a much bigger thing, so happy to figure that out. I just was reviewing all of this stuff and know that that deadline is coming up quickly. So whatever works in whatever format, but it feels like a really important conversation and bucket of work. Thanks. Thanks, Julie.
Okay. Well, as a steering committee can discuss this and figure out how to have this conversation next year. If the steering committee thinks that this is something we should be dealing with in the March meeting or the April meeting. Okay. Okay. Anything else on this? All right, so we're running a little ahead of schedule, which is unusual and lovely. I think what we were going to break for public comment. I think we still should break for public comment. And this would give us a little bit more time to work on the draft annual legislative report. So this we may be very thankful to have a few more minutes on that. So let's pause here for a second. And if anybody, members of the public who have been observing our meeting today, and have comments that you'd like to offer, particularly on the things we've been working on today or will be working on later today, this is a great time to do that. Obviously, you're welcome to bring up other issues too, but let's take a moment here. The way I know you're interested in making a comment is if you do raise your hand in the Zoom world, or if you wave at me, I probably can see you too. And so I see someone waving at me right now. Leendert Huisman, I don't want to mispronounce your name, so over to you. Leendert. You're on mute, so just hang on one second. See if you can grab yourself off mute. There you go.
So thank you very much. You did my name pretty well, so I'm not going to try to correct it. I basically have two questions. The first one is, and that just shows my ignorance in these issues. What's the difference between the ANR report and the greenhouse gas emissions inventory? And the second question is, does the report focus on fossil fuels, or does it also include biogenic greenhouse gas emissions? Those are my two questions.
So you've got two questions. I'm going to hold on those for just a second. We'll take other comment, and then I'll circle back to the council and see if we can if folks are able to answer some of those questions. But you're asking about the difference between the inventory and what this new reporting requirement would be, and also are biogenic sources of emissions included in this?
Correct.
Thanks for those two questions. Matthew, over to you.
Yes, and thank you. Yes, yeah. The question is, to us, and everybody has good thoughts and ideas on this. I do think, regardless of what happens, and it is just a state, feeling of this, we need to move forward regardless of it. We already set wheels in motion, and if we stop now, what what will the state think of us, or what would the legislature think of us as a council if we're just going to say, I know there's a lot of nuances, of, executive, Congress, and federal, of this. But regardless how I look at it, we gotta continue to move forward, regardless, because we're basically saying two different stories if we're just gonna backpedal. We don't want to be backpedaling because the legislators are gonna look at that and say, okay, that's not what we're reading. They read a lot of things very, very tightly, and we just want to tell them that regardless of what happens, and uh, Joey is right. We still got that deadline that we still have to meet regardless. So yeah, just going forward to support this and the memo and the draft letters and the cover letters that everybody's been talking about. I know there's some people that are don't want to support it, and there's some people that do. To me, it's like regardless how we look at it, we got to continue because we are obligated to continue to go forward regardless. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. Appreciate the comment. Alice Peel? Hang on one second, Alice. I think you're still on mute.
Yeah, I think I got it now.
Yeah, we got you. Yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment of encouragement to Secretary Moore and the full Climate Council about moving forward with requests for funding for important initiatives, like knowing what um, our greenhouse gas emissions are. I've been kind of in the hot seat or just in the middle of all kinds of, can we get this funding? Can we get this grant for many activities and programs in my area, which is Washington County and Waitsfield, with my work with CVRPC and my planning commission here. And we have definitely applied for grants and watched FEMA close the doors as we apply. But people ask me about, well, what can we do about funding? And my advice is go for it. Just apply for it, roll the dice and see what happens. Because it's important that not only are you applying for money, but you're making the statement about the kinds of things that are important for us to have. And this is a really important part of any climate action program, I believe. We're talking about it a lot right now in our Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission committee on writing our regional plan, and we're right in the middle of looking at our utilities and our infrastructure and electricity and generation. And we're looking at these kinds of greenhouse gas emissions. So they will be mentioned and part of our regional plan. So it's important to have um, these methods to support what we're really seeing as important for the state of Vermont to improve its climate. So my encouragement whenever anybody asks me is go for it, try, because you never know when a window is going to open up. Sometimes we've been surprised, and sometimes we're kind of just sitting, waiting, twiddling our thumbs. But put the marker down of what's important.
Thanks, Alice. Appreciate the encouragement for sure. Anything else from folks who've been tuning into our meeting today on these topics? Okay. So there was a couple specific questions there. And Jared, thank you for dropping the chat. On the two questions of how is this new reporting requirement different from the inventory and does it include biogenic? Jared, you want to take a whack at least the first one of those? And
Sure. And of course, welcome Jane or anyone from A&R to add to this. But I think it's a really good question that when we use these phrases quickly, it can be a little bit confusing. To me, the importance of a reporting rule is so that we can know from fuel suppliers and large emitters the amount of fuels coming from those entities if we're going to have any policy or regulatory program to hold them responsible for helping to reduce emissions over time. Any state that has done a cap and invest program, that has done a performance standard, that has done any sector-wide policy or regulation needs to know that information in terms of the responsible fuel suppliers and large emitters in terms of helping to bring down pollution over time. That's different than the statewide greenhouse gas inventory, which we already have the data to be able to get a total statewide figure of greenhouse gas emissions estimated on total statewide fuel sales. This is data from the tax department when it comes to residential, commercial, and industrial fuels. It is data from the tax department that's also reported by the Joint Fiscal Office, JFO, when it comes to transportation fuels. There is that statewide estimate of total gallons sold, which using appropriate, you know, emissions intensities being applied to those gallons, we can arrive at a statewide emissions estimate. But the reporting requirement is important not for the statewide emissions, or not primarily for the statewide emissions inventory, but for any policy or regulatory program that would begin to hold fuel providers and large emitters responsible for helping to reduce pollution over time. So I just want to make that key distinction as I understand it there. And to the latter part of your question, in terms of biogenic content, I think the only way we would begin to know that is if fuel suppliers begin to report that data, because my understanding is right now it's not. And just to go back a second, while there is aggregate kind of statewide information from the tax department on total fuel sales, from which we can derive a high level of confidence on emissions estimates within a certain range, that data is not disaggregated and is not provided kind of by fuel supplier, or has not been. That has been confidential. And so again, any kind of policy or program that would begin to hold fuel suppliers and large emitters responsible for helping to reduce emissions, we would need that greater granularity of data from the proposed standalone program that A&R is suggesting. That's all my understanding. Others feel free to add to that, but I hope that's helpful.
thanks, Jared. I really appreciate that. And Linda, quick response, and then we'll probably keep moving on.
Very quick response. First, thank you for the answers. I understand now that the A&R report is focused on the fuel suppliers, whatever that type of fuel may be, and I really applaud that. I do want to point out that about 20% of greenhouse gas emissions in Vermont is biogenic, and that's a large chunk that we should stop ignoring.
Thank you for that comment. I appreciate that comment. All right. Before we move on to the next thing, anything else, counselors, in response to that public comment we've just gotten? Okay. thank you everyone for chiming in. It's really helpful to have different viewpoints come into these calls. So thank you. Um, all right. So the next thing we have is the draft annual legislative report. In that, I will turn over to Jane to walk us through what we have and anything you want to say about what's happened since you discussed this in the steering committee. Um, so Jane, let me push it over to you and let me know if you want anything shared on the screen or what you'd like.
Okay, well, just to preface, the steering committee has not seen this report
Oh,
either.
sorry.
Sorry.
That's the
So,
problem. Me missing the steering committee meeting.
yes,
Yes.
yeah. So the invitation to the steering committee was that I would draft this on the Climate Council's behalf for this meeting, full month ahead of when it's due. So maybe to help support a nicer holiday break this year, because we normally come back in January to review and approve this. So the Climate Council is, through the Global Warming Solutions Act for new climate counselors, is obligated to provide an annual legislative report due on January 15th to the legislature. And it's obligated to report on the work it's completed in summary over the last year. So I believe I made somewhat of a candid joke at the steering committee that we should just sort of write C climate action plan for this year's report. And in large part, while that's true, there are other obligations that we work on around the Global Warming Solutions Act that is not as explicitly tied to the climate action plan, namely some additional technical analyses and support of other components of the GWSA, like the development of a measuring and assessing progress tool that we've actually recently rebranded as a climate action tracker. And so I have drafted the report. It is online. I think that for many of you who have served on the council for some time now, it is very true to the template and format and sections that we have included over the last 5 or so years. And so it's not out of sync in large part with what I think you would expect it to include. It does link to the climate action plan and include in large part the executive summary from the climate action plan that I endeavored to tighten up a bit in the report, but is largely in line with that. And I'll just draw your attention to 2 comments. The reason that it includes comments in the PDF that are online is in large part, one, because last year we decided to reference the work the Climate Action Office does annually with our Interagency Advisory Board to sum up climate funding on behalf of the state for every fiscal year. So we decided to fold that into this report and speak to the spending that the state government is deploying on behalf of climate action. That report is drafted, but is still being revised and reviewed by the Interagency Advisory Board and in service of being finalized by the end of the year. And so I did put some preliminary numbers in there, but noted those are likely to change and that I would update with the final numbers in the coming weeks. And then second, there's a comment regarding the memo that you all just discussed about the greenhouse gas reporting program and the expectation that there might have been some comments like there were today and revisions that we would link the final memo to the Climate Council legislative report, and that's just wasn't done yet. Everything else, I believe, is there and may require edits or word tweaks, revisions. The hope today, with David's help, is that we could draft any concerns or comments that you have or edits and approve the Climate Council report going to the legislature in January with the edits you note today, so we don't have to meet again as a council. So happy to walk through it, but don't feel like that's really necessary unless folks would like me to pull it up on screen. So David, I'll sort of defer back to you.
So given that we have a few extra minutes of time, I wonder if we might do the following. If anybody has quick clarifying questions for something you saw in here and you're not quite sure why it was written that way, now's a good time to shout those out to Jane. Second, why don't we give ourselves just like 5 to 8 minutes of reading time for folks to skim back through, look through the thing again, in silence. We can just do that. And then we'll pick up and see if we need to make a punch list of things that we would want to see some changes on in here as a council, and then see if we can agree on that punch list. So clarifying questions and then some punch list. Now, Rich, was there something you already know you'd like to see something changed? Is that why your hand went up? Hang on, you're on mute. You're on mute.
It's a clarifying question.
Yeah.
In the pie chart and related data, it shows that the overwhelming amount of funding that you're reporting on was for mitigation efforts as opposed to adaptation resilience. But there isn't a breakdown of the mitigation spending categories. And I was frankly surprised at the fractions shown. And maybe I just missed it in the text, but maybe you can, after everybody looks at it and we come back and talk about it, you might be able to help us understand where all those dollars are going.
Sure. I mean, let me start by saying about the percentage quickly. So, and for folks who aren't, this is our third year producing the annual climate funding document. We're are shifting to calling it climate funding rather than climate spending because we're trying to articulate that it's really a snapshot of new funding in the state budget annually. And it's also intended to reflect funding that has the primary purpose of climate. So, for instance, the example we often give is clean water funding. Clean water funding has a tremendous overlap and benefit for adding resilience to our state, but the primary purpose is obviously to clean up our waterways. And so we don't reflect that as a climate expenditure in our report. And so, and because it's intended to be new funding, or annually appropriated funding. So if funds were given to states in one time, we don't show it, even though there might still be dollars to be spent down. So an example of that around resilience is funding for recovery efforts that might have come through in fiscal year 25. We haven't spent all of those dollars down yet, but they were reflected in last year's spending plan, annual spending report, and so aren't shown here again. So there was this significant decrease in the budget this year from a resilience perspective because those dollars are shown last year. Though the details of the definitions of how we make those breakdowns and determine what's included and what is not is in the spending document. And I'd be happy to reflect a little bit more clarity here so it's not a misnomer. But we do ultimately link that document here for that greater detail. And I maybe at the very least should reference that understanding what we include and what we don't include should be drawn upon by the more detailed report. And then around mitigation, there is a very detailed spreadsheet that says what all those different programs are, and then we classify them by whether their primary purpose is resilience or mitigation efforts, and that's in the attached PDF to that report, so you can see that. So it's work like our annual, it's like our weatherization funds and other things like that. So hopefully that's helpful. But I'll put last year's final report in the chat just so you can get a little more clarity and see the PDF document to get a sense. But also know that I can pull in a little more detail here if that's helpful, so we don't mischaracterize anything in this report since it's intended to be a summary of a more detailed one.
Okay. Great. So, yeah. So Jane, there is some interest in seeing those definitions of how stuff gets determined to go in a certain bucket. Okay. So folks, why don't we just take 5 minutes here, and everyone could just sort of sit in silence for a second and skim through. If you've already read it, great. Skim through it again. If you're kind of just getting yourself in there, dive into the pieces that you find most interesting. I'll take 5 minutes in silence, and Jane might throw some additional resources in the chat as we go. All right, if everybody's cool with that, let's just do 5 minutes and do some reading time. All right, folks, let's take 30 seconds here and all right, so welcome back, folks. That was a speed read for sure. I think I just want to open it up to counselors to say if you had really important edits, friendly amendments you would make to this report, what would they be? And I'll note what's happening in the chat. Rich with a specific suggestion. Jane just said that sounds like a good addition. So I'm noting that as one. So I guess we don't need to talk more about that. But if there's other things that folks caught preparing for this meeting or caught just now, that would be great. Leslie Ann, great to see you.
Where's David? Sorry, I've been off camera for all this time. I just had one quick addition on page 5 in the section that says climate action plan. You go through the various hazards and disasters. I would ask if we could put a line in there about the 2024-2025 droughts, particularly since one of our dairy farms just went out of business because of the drought, and there has been tremendous amount of personal damage and hardship and suffering. And I think it just sort of puts it on the same level, or at least in people's minds, about being aware of climate related impacts that are not just on the excessive water side, but also on the dry side because of how many various sectors have been affected. Thanks.
Thanks, Leslie Ann. Very helpful. Chris?
The only thing I suggest, just maybe ask that a brief reference, and I don't think I saw it there, to the Vermont, the VERTA process, the Vermont Rural Technical Assistance process, because in the prior plan and this one we talk about municipal capacity, and VERTA is looking at the how to augment, well, the current kind of Vermont rural technical assistance ecosystem and how to maybe to streamline it or improve it. And then also better factor in what actual municipal needs are. So anyway, may just want to make a brief reference to that. I think if Bronwyn's around, if she wants to say anything to that, that's awesome or not.
Thanks, Chris. And are you imagining it in a certain part of this report?
Honestly, I'd have to go back and look, but I think it'd almost be as part of was it part of the Homes Act or Act 181? I've lost track of them all. It could maybe be briefly referenced maybe in the legislative pieces. I'll go back and look and can make a recommendation offline to Jane.
Okay.
I don't want to take up people's time unless there's opposition to it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. Carrick, good to see you.
Good to see you, David. Good to see you. Quick question. This is a report to the legislature, correct? So I'm just wondering why we're listing bills that thus far, maybe decidedly so, have not been successful in a report to the legislature.
Jane, help us out here.
Yeah, I take that directly from the update every year that the secretary and I give to the Climate Council on work with ties to the Climate Action Plan. Be more than happy to take the suggestion of the Climate Council to only show ones that were successful. Happy to have a discussion. I just always lean right back on the presentation that Julie uses to update the Climate Council on legislation with ties to the Climate Action Plan. So to date, we have included ones that are very encompassing of all, whether they've passed or not.
Yeah, some of those are irritating, honestly, to be blunt as I can be. So I don't like them, but you're listing them in here, and I'm trying to hang with you. So it was in that spirit of saying, okay, this sucks. I don't like that in there, but okay. But all right. I take your point, Jane. Thank you very much. I don't mean to give you a hard time. It's just, it's the idea here, I think, David, is you trying to encourage collaboration and get to consensus. And some of those were, to me, at least in my teams, in my judgment, was contrary, in fact, and was not consistent with some of the recommendations. But Jane is right; those are real life legislative proposals. So I'll defer to the wisdom of this august group on that. But I wanted to raise the issue. So thank you.
Fair. Thanks, Carrick. So yeah, I think it's a question mark whether we just put in the same presentation the council looked at, or whether it's some version of it that strips out things that weren't successful. Okay. David?
Yeah, I was just thinking through how to edit that. I like Carrick's instinct around this. I mean, it's an agency report to the legislature, and it reads like that. It's an update. It's informational. but I had, if folks were willing to humor me, on page 6, there's a kind of the a kind of a good summary of the top 10 priorities, and I wondered if we could use that as almost like an executive summary before the introduction. So for those legislators, which would be 99% of them that don't actually read the report, that they might actually read the first page and see that we had a set of recommendations that I think are pretty impressive in terms of their messaging. It's about affordability, it's about helping to recover from disasters, it's about building our workforce, it's identifying the sustainable long-term funding that we need to implement this plan. Like those feel to me like awesome talking points, and lifting those up at the very front of the report feels like it doesn't stray too far into the realm of advocacy for an agency report. My
Right.
humble.
So a specific suggestion to lift up those things are on page 6 that are the summaries or of the council's priorities right up to the top of the report. Okay. I'm taking a list of stuff, folks, then we're going to look back at it quickly and see if there's any concerns for folks. So think about if you're like, oh, I hate that idea. We'll get to that in 1 second. Jared?
Yeah, as I read this list, this goes back to Commissioner Johnson's point and then the response to it, is that somebody could read this as a list of legislative proposals consistent with the climate action plan. And I don't think that that list is or was intended to be that way. I read it more as a list of bills that have been introduced in the legislature that have some connection to um, the climate action plan and to state efforts around pollution reduction, climate resilience and adaptation, et cetera. Um, I think that there's only a subset of those bills that have a direct tie to the cap rather than a subject area connection to it. And I think it would be a longer, more difficult and likely a process that we wouldn't find agreement on to um, do that separation and teasing out. So I'm inclined to just do a little bit more work to emphasize that, these are bills that were introduced that would have implications for the cap or are in the same subject area that we are aware of, but not to be clear that we're not making a suggestion that that whole list was recommended by the cap, which it doesn't say, but I could see how someone could read it that way if we weren't a little bit more explicit. Um, the other suggestion I wanted to make is, and this goes back to Rich's suggestion in the chat at 12:31 that Jane seemed to agree with. One example when I was looking at that spreadsheet, Jane, that you provided on page or the table on page 7 around state climate spending, and one example really stood out to me as where, the categorization of one set of funds could really change the balance of that pie chart. And so I'm looking at the very bottom of the table on page 7 where it talks about legislatively directed ARPA expenditures, including funds for low and moderate income weatherization, heat pump water heaters, electric panel upgrades, and flood recovery. That was $44 million of federal funding. That's all labeled as mitigation, when my understanding is much of that went to replace equipment that was damaged during floods, to help people move electric panels to first floors rather than basements, to replace flood damaged water heaters and heating systems. So I just think that that's one example where the type of nuance that Rich was suggesting, and you seem to agree with, Jane, would be helpful, because I think it would be very fair to look at that pot of money and say that wasn't 44 million all for mitigation. A lot of that was flood recovery and resilience in relation to energy systems as well.
Okay, great. Anything else folks want to say before I show you what you got here? Okay. So again, I'm just going to share my raw notes, and apologies for typos and other things here. But what I literally cut and paste Richard's thing in here. So basically it's doing that, what Rich said. I just noted, Jared, what you had just said here in the page 7. There's some more nuance in here that Jane seems to be comfortable doing. So that's one thing, right? The nuance on the categorization and all that. So that a second thing on page 5, when we talk about hazards and disasters, put in a line about the droughts in 2024, 2025. A third thing, put a mention in about the Vermont Rural Technical Assistance Process, which is trying to improve technical assistance, and Chris could provide some detail as appropriate to Jane. The piece about the chart with the bills, like, do we take out the ones that were not successful, or do we just put a slightly beefier explanation at the top to say, hey, this is just a list of bills in the subject area of this. This doesn't mean the council has a particular opinion on any of them. So that is a decision you all need to make right now, if you want to go down that road. And the final one is on page 6. There's a great summary of the top 10 priorities. Should we lift that up higher to catch people's attention on the front page of this thing? Okay, I'm just going to sort of suggest here that the pathway on this one is this, and it's not this. Excuse me, it's not taking it out just from an ease standpoint. But if you added a sentence before the table to say essentially this, someone can write it more elegantly than I can in real time like this. But essentially, you add a sentence, say, hey, this is just a list of bills, and we're not saying one thing or another about them. Okay. If that is the way this goes, is there anything here people can't live with? Is there anything here that's not going to work? And I'm just conscious of the time because we do have one more thing to do. I got too loose on time here, but is there anything else that folks can't live with this? Okay, great. Now, here's the sort of big question for everyone. Are folks comfortable with these changes, letting Jane in the office finish it up and sending it out? Are we okay doing that? Or is there some other little half step we're going to have to figure out in early January when we don't have a meeting currently? So does anybody have a concern in having Jane take this feedback, finish up the report, fix the comments, fix the parts that's like TBD, and sending it out? Jared?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm wondering if kind of an in-between option between the ones that you just suggested, David, which would be on the one hand just saying, please incorporate this feedback and send it in versus another council meeting would be, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we have another steering committee meeting before this deadline.
We have one on the 12th. So I can't remember what the deadline is, the 7th, the 16th,
15th, right?
15th, 16th, yeah.
So one option, and that is a link that is made available to, in that all counselors are welcome to attend. It's a already scheduled and warned meeting. One option would be to basically do option 1, ask Climate Action Office to incorporate the feedback that we've discussed today, and then share it one more time with the steering committee, and anybody who is interested in seeing that could join that meeting. Okay. But I think it would likely be a formality, but it does provide at least one other potential check-in point that's not a full council meeting.
Great. I had a similar idea as well. Any concerns with doing what Jared said? And Jane and company, I want to make sure you're comfortable with that too. But any concerns with essentially saying, ANR, Climate Action Office, go ahead and make the changes, show it to the steering committee, then submit it on the 15th. Steering committee meets on Monday the 12th. Everybody's welcome.
I don't have any problem with that regarding the timeline. I will just note, if the steering committee wanted to make further edits or changes, that is not an appropriate role for the steering committee, that would then initiate a council meeting, only because the steering committee is not supposed to make decisions on behalf of the Climate Council. It's supposed to work on process and work in service of the Climate Council. So I think it's like a weird in-between just spot. So I think it's probably fine, because I don't think I anticipate like large changes, and it's a public way to see it before it's submitted, but just want to note that.
Right. So then the steering committee on the 12th, if it felt like something more significant was needed, you'd probably have to pull together a quick council meeting to make that work. Okay. Thanks, Jane. Yep. All right. Any concerns then about moving forward? Chris, I see your language dropped in the chat here. Okay. All right. So in summary, we've got a list of things to change. We've got the steering committee will take a final look at it before it drops in. If something needs to be addressed that's significant, it's probably a little quick virtual meeting is going to be called at the council to do that work. Okay. Great. So here we go. Racing to the finish. January public meetings. And Sophie hopefully is here. If not, I can help to lead this because we're going to be involved in these as well. But let me just check and see if Sophie Veltrop is here. Sophie is here. Awesome. Hey, Sophie, how's it going?
Hi, pretty good.
Would you like to lead us through this? And I'm happy to share my screen with the agenda when you want that.
Yeah, I can also do that.
Your choice.
So our goal here today is to hear from counselors who are willing and able to be part of the public meetings that are coming up in January. While the past while the cap was passed back in July, these are our opportunity to kind of have some events that showcase the cap and talk about what it looks like to move from the planning stage into the action stage and mobilize many of these things. So I will share my screen with the draft agenda, which received some input from the steering committee earlier this month. And I'll just walk folks through it. And note places where we're hoping for some counselor involvement. So there are two of these being offered. We've got January 6th in the evening and January 12th in the afternoon. And these times were selected hoping that legislators can join. So both meetings will follow the same format with a welcome and kicking things off. It would be great to have a counselor involved in that. Then some introductory context of just introducing the plan and celebrating what it is now after the 2025 update. So we're talking about a high-level overview, talking about how the plan is a roadmap and setting us up for actualizing it. It take a lot of different players and a lot of collaboration. An overview of what those 10 highest priority actions are and really honing in to give people a sense of the meat of the plan. And also a nod to how public input and engagement was a part of this, and that hopefully Vermonters will see their voices reflected in it. And this meeting is continuing that. We'll have a moment for Q&A to make sure everybody's following along and on the same page. And then we'll turn towards an exercise around what's most compelling. CBI will facilitate an interactive component so people can weigh in. And then we were thinking that having somewhat of a panel where counselors can talk about how this plan is serving as a launching pad for their work with the organization, community, etc., and opening it up for discussion from there. I think all this is framed again around moving from planning into action. I think we can move into seeing who is excited about being part of presenting and speaking at these meetings.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd love it if folks, maybe even in the chat, make it easy. Just drop your name in the chat, say, I'm up for helping here. That would be really helpful, counselors. These meetings will be most successful if people are able to do like what David just did and say, I'm in, I'm helpful to, I'm eager to be helpful here. So folks, I encourage you to do that. We can think specifically about roles, right? I'll be facilitating these meetings. These will be, we want to tee you up for a successful meeting. So we appreciate everybody weighing in. Evening on the 6th, noon on the 12th, would really benefit from your help. And thanks, David, Kelly, and Jared, for volunteering, and Joey and Chris. Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I think as Sophie was saying, these are an opportunity to speak to the public. It's an opportunity to speak to legislators. And it's an opportunity also, we have better materials because we have more beautified executive summary and stuff like that that we can show off now as part of these public meetings. Okay.
Yeah. And I'll just add a note on that we will have we'll have the designed summary of the climate action plan at that moment. It's unlikely that we'll have the full entire climate action plan in full design, but we can use this as a nice teaser and follow up with that link for everybody who joined and registered for the meetings. But we can share the summary at the meetings.
Right. Excellent. Okay. Thanks everyone, and feel free to reach out directly to Sophie and or directly to me about being involved in the kind of role you'd be comfortable playing. We do think it's just so much better if you all as counselors are there and talking about your process and what you got to. All right. Sophie, anything else on your end there?
I guess the only other thing is that I will share out, you all have received the calendar invitation. The meeting is up on the website. So if you'd like to share with any groups you're a part of or have connections with, would definitely encourage that. If there's any entities, groups, listservs, etc., that you want me to be aware of as I'm promoting this event, feel free to reach out to me and let me know and I can help get the word out.
Super. Okay. All right. The last thing we need to do is talk about 2026. In addition to these virtual public meetings in January, there's a proposed cadence of meetings. Jane, in part because I wasn't at the last steering committee meeting, I don't want to mischaracterize what the plan is here. But maybe Jane, if you want to say a word about sort of the sort of flow of meetings, about quarterly meetings for the Climate Council, probably monthly check-ins with the steering committee. That's the vision here. Is there anything else to say about that, Jane?
You stole my thunder. That's the vision, and we're just checking in.
Okay, great. So quick check-in, counselors, quarterly flow of meetings, steering committee meeting monthly, and really the steering committee trying to make sure there's connectivity there of the key issues and that we're prepping up council meetings appropriately. Any concerns about that? David?
Not a concern, but a question. I'm new enough that last year I didn't pay any attention to the legislature at all, and in terms of climate council, we were primarily focused on the report.
Yeah.
But I did read in some of the discussion that there's the legislature may call for testimony, and the agency may end up pitching some of that to climate council members, and or they may come directly to us. Anyway, it occurred to me that we might want to, maybe there is a protocol, but just some way of checking in with the full council so the positions that are being represented are, in accord with our collective.
Yeah. Jane, there is a protocol. You want to say a word about it?
Yeah, there is a protocol when it comes to our agency. There are often asks of the Climate Council to our agency, and when there are, the steering committee represents jurisdiction around Senate and House appointees when it's generic testimony, so broader testimony about the climate action plan and not specific around a recommendation. And when there's a specific ask around a recommendation with ties to sectoral work, we go to the chairs of the subcommittees. That isn't to say that we couldn't share more broadly, but right now it has been those counselors in those seats represent the work of the Climate Council.
Thanks, David, for bringing that up. Okay. Any concerns about the flow of the quarterly council meetings, monthly steering committee meetings? And again, everyone's welcome to show up at the steering committee meetings, of course. Okay, that looks great. By the way, one thing the steering committee is going to look at, oh, sorry, Jane, I was going to say in January, the steering committee is going to look at any guidance for subcommittees for 2026. And we weren't ready to do that today. So the steering committee is going to take a whack at that and then communicate that out for subcommittees, because some subcommittees like Just Transitions are looking for a little more guidance.
Yeah, thank you for that addition. And I was going to just note that it might be a worthy discussion to revisit that process around legislative testimony with the steering committee and just ask if there's something that we've not done that I could see being of value is just like a blanket notice to the Climate Council when there's council testimony, just saying these counselors are representing this issue, but that way the full council knows that the testimony is happening and others can obviously participate. So we can revisit the policy and procedure in place for testimony from the Climate Council with the steering committee at the January meeting and just note any revisions or changes in service of keeping the broader council at large apprised of testimony.
Thanks, Jane. Great. So we just have a minute or so. If folks have been joining our call and there's a public comment, we have it on the agenda. I want to make sure I don't skip over that. Any final public comment before we finish up our meeting here?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. I think that's it. We have a bunch of action items coming out of this meeting about the legislative report, about the memo to accompany ANR's report on the reporting rule, and then some steering committee things for January. And what else? And I think that's it. So it was happy holidays, everybody. I think that's what we say right now. Be well. Have a great rest of the month. Be celebratory. And we'll see you all in the new year.
Great to see you all.
Thanks, David.
Take care, everybody.
Holidays.